Morgan, Salamat Pagi, Buenos Dias, Bonjour, and good morning in all the beautiful languages that you represent from 100+ countries. Greetings to all those who are joining us online from across the world. My dear IUFRO family, I should say my dear big IUFRO family, IUFRO members, and esteemed partners and guests. Welcome to the day 2 of the 26th IUFRO World Congress in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm incredibly pleased to moderate today's keynote session on the theme Strengthening Forest Resilience and Adaptation to Stress. My name is Purobi Bose. I'm an indigenous woman, Santhal Adivasi from India. I'm a proud IUFRO member, and I'm a current and incoming board member and a coordinator of Division Social Aspects of Forest and Forestry. I'm a social anthropologist and artist highlighting the nexus of forest tenure and indigenous people, critical minerals, women's land rights, and community-based forest in tropical countries. In the past 20 years, for my work, I have been resident of 10 countries on 5 continents, and currently I work with Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, SLU, as an associate professor on forest policy. My university is proudly hosting this IUFRO Congress. A big round of applause for my university, please. Thank you. I am honored to be elected as an international fellow of the Royal Swedish Academy of Agricultural and Forestry. And next month, I relocate to my tropical world to be in Papua New Guinea, connecting indigenous communities, women, and youths in co-management of their traditional forest, land, and resources, and co-creating stories to communicate their power of resilience. Today's plenary theme is strengthening forest resilience and adaptation to stress. The term resilience evokes different meaning in different contexts. For example, resilience through the lens of foresters and ecologists. When they look at the history of forests, they see the pattern of increased resilience with the repeated stresses, and forest is not alone. For example, resilience through the lens of social dimensions, societies that experience frequent collapses do become more resilient, experiencing faster recoveries and diverse coping strategies. And from the individual and gender lens, our resilience approach and decision-making responds to the complex gender dynamics, increasing social inclusion at multiple levels. We will hear about resilience and adaptation to the stress from our 2 esteemed keynote speakers, Dr. Andrew Liebhold, apologies for my pronunciation, and Dr. Juliette Biao. Welcome. A few house rules. Trust me, if you can, the best way to listen is to turn off or mute your mobile. Each speaker will speak for 15 to 20 minutes, and then we will have a short clarification questions, and then we will move on to the second speaker, and at the end, we will have a question and answer. And so try to keep your questions very sharp and precise. We will have 2 volunteers here who will help with the microphone to reach out to you to get your questions. I would really appreciate if you can move forward so that it feels more connected. I don't want to be spread out. It would be very great for our speakers to have a better connection with you. So if you can move forward a bit, would be nice. With this note, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Andrew Liebhold. His keynote speech title is Insect and Diseases Pose a Great Growing Threat to Forest Health and Worldwide. Dr. Andrew, popularly known as with the nickname Sandy, needs no introduction. At IUFRO, he has held various officer positions and chaired the Scientific Congress Committee for 125th IUFRO anniversary in Freiburg, Germany in 2017. He has received the IUFRO Scientific Achievement Award in 2010, and he has done his PhD in entomology from the University of California, Berkeley. He was elected a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in 2015 and a fellow of Entomological Society of America in 2021. He has been a research entomologist with the US Forest Service since 1988 He currently also serves as a scientific leader with the Faculty of Forestry and Wood Science, Czech University of Life Sciences. Dr. Andrew has published over 300 papers in peer-reviewed journals and currently serves on editorial boards for the Journal of Population Ecology and Biological Inventions. He's a citizen of United States and Germany. A big round of applause for Andrew Liebhold.
Thank you very much, Puravi. This is really fantastic. And I have a great affinity for IUFRO. It's been very important for me, and this is an incredible honor to be able to present here. And I'm also really quite pleased to see in the Congress that this theme one addressing resilience and adaptation to stress. This is like really close to the entire topic of forest health. And so it's really nice to see this topic treated at this high level in this Congress. My background is with forest insects, and there's always a natural tendency to group forest insects and forest pathogens together, even though their biologies are really different. But they do share a lot of similarities in their ecological relationships to forests, as well as their management. And I'm actually kind of an old guy, and during my career, I've actually seen quite a transformation in the kind of dominant paradigm of the way we treat forest insects and diseases throughout the world. In the early days, when I was young, people used to refer to as forest insects quite often as insect enemies of forests. And quite a bit of work was always spent trying to figure out ways to kill them, because it was considered that insects and diseases were really a threat to anything that killed trees, was a threat to the sustenance of forest resources. But over time, there's been a change in that dominant paradigm, and increasingly there's been a recognition that forest insects and diseases, they actually play crucial roles in forest ecosystems. And especially those species that cause major disturbances, those major disturbances are considered to be crucial for the forest dynamics in many forest ecosystems, much like fire. And that those recurring disturbances very often are crucial to the sustainable management of forests. Now, this concept of balance of nature is admittedly a complete simplification of the way ecology works. But I think it is maybe perhaps useful for understanding how anthropogenic influences are affecting insect and disease problems that we have now. Because, as I mentioned before, many of these natural disturbance regimes were actually beneficial. But what we're seeing is that influences such as climate change are actually altering the interactions between forests and these disturbance agents, and causing that these disturbance agents to be greatly increased sometimes in their temporal scope, but also their geographical range. And I think a really good example is provided by the situation in Central Europe, where bark beetles, we know that for thousands of years there have been bark beetle outbreaks, and those bark beetle outbreaks are very much part of the natural forest dynamics. But with increasing climate change, the frequency and geographical range of these disturbances is increasing. I'm going to focus most of the rest of my talk on a different anthropogenic influence, and that's globalization. And globalization, one of the consequences of globalization is there's been tremendous increases in global trade and travel. And one of the unintended consequences of this increased trade and travel is the accidental movement of organisms from one part of the world to another. And this is happening with forest insects and diseases, that pretty much every continent in the world, we're seeing a steady increase in both insects and diseases. Starting somewhere maybe around the time of the Industrial Revolution in the 1850s, we've seen this continual increase in arrival, mostly accidental arrival of these organisms. And I know that within our field of forest entomology, during my career, I've seen a shift from increasing concentration on non-native organisms. These are some data that are from historical reports of the US Forest Service on forest health conditions in the United States, and they show that back in the early decades of the 60s and 70s, most of what people concentrated on were native insect problems. And there's been a large transformation so that now most of the research and management activities focus on non-native organisms. And the reason for this, in part, is just there are more of these species all the time, as I was mentioning before. But the other thing is that many of these organisms can have huge impacts. Many of these, even though we know most of these non-native insects actually are pretty much inconsequential. As far as we know, they don't cause any problem, but a small fraction can actually have huge impacts, causing tree mortality on a very large spatial scale. And a good example of this is provided by the invasion of the emerald ash borer in North America that we're sort of right now in the middle of. We think it arrived maybe about 30 years ago accidentally with solid wood packaging material. And over the last several decades, as it's expanded its range in North America, it's caused this huge wave of tree mortality, and the consequence is that most trees in the genus Fraxinus are dying. And so it's a tremendous impact. A few years ago, my colleague Songlin Fei and other colleagues, we were interested in quantifying what's the total impact of all these insect and disease invasions? Because we know there's, as I mentioned before, we have many of these. And so we tapped into our National Forest Inventory database, and we were able to quantify the levels of tree mortality that these agents cause that is above background levels. And we found our final estimate was one of something over 5 teragrams of carbon per year of extra biomass in dead trees being produced by these agents across the US. And just to kind of register where that lies, it's about somewhere in the same region of how much tree mortality is caused by wildfire annually in the US. So it's really high. And of course, the impacts of this tree mortality would be, as you can imagine, is potentially quite high on traditional forest resources like timber, but also other ecosystem services such as carbon sequestration. In addition, there are more nuanced sociological impacts of non-native insects and diseases. And a good example of this, again, is provided by the emerald ash borer in North America, which is virtually eliminating the species Fraxinus nigra, black ash. And unfortunately, this species is used exclusively by indigenous people in North America for their basket-making tradition. And this basket-making tradition is a crucial part of their culture, and unfortunately is being eliminated. So why is it that these organisms have such huge impact? And really, there are two main processes involved that explain this huge impact. One is the lack of co-evolved defenses in trees, and the other is enemy release. And one of the things we know is that trees, throughout thousands of years of evolution, very often they develop resistance to insects and diseases. And this is well illustrated by the fungal species Endothea parasitica, which is the causal organism of chestnut blight in North America and Europe. But in its native range in East Asia, this species is a saprophyte, meaning that it just colonizes dead and dying tree tissue. And this is really a result of, again, thousands of years of coevolution between this fungal species and its host tree. But when this tree has been accidentally transported to North America 100 years ago, it encountered a tree species, American chestnut, that throughout evolution had never been exposed to this organism. And as a consequence, this fungal species was able to colonize living tree tissue and as a consequence, virtually eliminate this tree species from North America. The other mechanism that I wanted to mention is what we call enemy release. And insects in their native range typically are associated with a whole community of predators and parasites, and these species naturally regulate populations at low levels. But when insect species are transported to a new part of the world, they're typically moved without these species, and as a consequence, the populations of many of these species explode, reach very high population levels, causing damage. I should note that this same mechanism of enemy release can also be applied to plants. That, again, plants in their native range are typically associated with a community of herbivores and plant pathogens. And when those trees or plants are moved to a new part of the world, they're typically transplanted without those organisms. And as a consequence, the negative influence of those organisms on their growth and reproduction disappears, and they're able to grow and reproduce at very high levels. And this is a big explanation of why we see so many invasive non-native plants in forests around the world. That there are many reasons for the invasiveness of plants, but one of the main reasons is this enemy release, the lack of natural enemies. This enemy release also plays a huge role in the use of non-native trees in forest plantations around the world. That again, non-native trees very often are growing in the absence of the herbivores and plant pathogens, and they may exhibit extremely high growth rates. And this is really nicely illustrated by these data, which show the annual increment of tree species, many different tree species, both native and non-native, planted in commercial forest plantations around the world. And it's pretty clear from this graph that non-native trees produce much higher growth rates than native trees. And the big reason for that, or one of the big reasons for that, is enemy release. And again, this concept of enemy release refers to this phenomenon by which when a tree is moved to a new part of the world, it's typically there without the insects and diseases that slow its growth down. But unfortunately, we're learning that this doesn't last forever. And there are really two mechanisms that erode this enemy release. One is that very often the native insects that are feeding on native trees are able to expand their population range to the non-native tree. The other process that happens is that the insects native to the native range where the tree comes from are eventually able to invade the area where the tree is planted, and that tree is reunited with these insects and diseases, and again, this enemy release is diluted. And there are really a lot of really good examples of this from around the world. This is some nice work that Mike Wingfield and his group did with acacias in South Africa. There are several species of acacia that have been introduced from Australia to South Africa, and some of them which have been quite invasive. And it's been shown that many species of fungal pathogens that are native to trees in South Africa have been able to expand their range to utilize these introduced acacia species. Also, a lot of great examples are with eucalyptus, which of course is the most widely planted group of tree species in the world, in part because of their tremendous growth rates. But again, unfortunately, this enemy release is being diluted over time. Over time, there's more and more insects that are native to Australia where they coexist in nature with eucalyptus, and they're introduced to parts of the world where eucalyptus is planted in plantations. And really a nice example of this phenomenon is provided by Douglas fir in New Zealand. The Douglas fir, like radiata pine, was experimentally planted in the early 1900s, and it exhibited phenomenal growth rates. But unfortunately, in the late 1950s, the disease Swiss needlecast was accidentally introduced from North America. I should note, by the way, Swiss needlecast really actually doesn't have anything to do with Switzerland. It actually is native, like Douglas fir, to North America. But some really nice work by scientists at Scion Research has shown that following the accidental introduction of Swiss needlecast, the growth rates of Douglas fir declined substantially. And they also showed that this translated into substantial decreases in the profitability of plantations that grow Douglas fir. And as a consequence, now in New Zealand, Douglas fir only amounts to about 10% of the planted area because of this decreased growth. So, in the last part of my talk, I wanted to say a little bit more about what can be done, because theme one talks about strengthening forest resilience, and so I want to address this question of what can be done to minimize the damage that's caused by non-native insects and diseases. And the first thing I want to emphasize is probably the number one thing that can be done is biosecurity. And biosecurity refers to the practice of preventing insect and disease invasions or other non-native organisms. And in every country in the world has a government agency that focuses on biosecurity. There are also international organizations such as the International Plant Protection Convention, and they focus on harmonizing these efforts around the world. And this is something that I think is of utmost importance, and most of that effort is directed either at preventing the species from initially being introduced via regulating trade to make trade less likely to transmit these organisms, but also surveillance and eradication for finding new incursions of these species. The last thing I want to touch on is the use of native versus non-native trees. As I mentioned before, non-native trees are grown around the world in plantation forestry, and many of these tree species produce phenomenal growth rates, which translates into very high levels of profitability of plantation forestry. And one of the things that I also mentioned is that over time we're seeing that the enemy release that contributes to the profitability of these tree species is eroding. And so as a consequence, I want to kind of emphasize that biosecurity in these situations is extremely important because the continued use of non-native trees in forestry depends on maintaining that enemy release and keeping these agents out. So in parts of the world where they emphasize plantations of the non-native trees, biosecurity really has to be emphasized. The second thing I wanted to mention is the problem of tree invasions. And this is something, it doesn't happen in all forest plantations in every part of the world, but it does happen in some areas where planted trees, non-native trees, escape from forest plantations and invade adjoining natural areas. And this is something that can be quite a big problem because the invasion of these natural areas can diminish the ecosystem services that those natural areas provide. And I think this is something in the future, there's really a need for more research because, as I mentioned before, these tree invasions, they don't happen everywhere. And they just happen with certain species, they happen in certain environments. And I think that providing a better understanding of when and where these invasions happen would lead to a safer use of non-native trees in forestry. And along those lines, I want to point out that recently, through the Council of Europe, a group of scientists published a code of conduct for invasive trees, targeting not only the forest industry, but also horticultural industry. And it might be, I would suggest that it's worthwhile for all of us to take a look at this and consider it, and because I think it does provide some useful guidance. So in closing, I wanted to touch on contrasting climate change and the biological invasion problem. These are the two biggest problems that I think are responsible for most of the forest health problems that we see around the world. But I would argue that they're mostly separate problems. Climate change is mostly driven by increased atmospheric carbon dioxide. Biological invasions are mostly caused by increased trade and travel. But there are a few areas where these two problems overlap. One is that one of the things that we're seeing is with climate change, a range expansion of different species, both trees and insects and diseases. And as a consequence of these range shifts, we again can have situations where trees and insects and diseases come into contact that through evolution they've never had any contact, and that can result in all the problems that I mentioned before. The other thing is that we know that insects and diseases invasions themselves, they can actually alter the carbon dynamics in forests, either through increased tree mortality or reduced growth rates, and that can then influence climate change directly. And then the third thing I want to mention is the possibility of climate change mitigation and adaptation, and how those strategies might actually impact the biological invasion problem. As you may know, that some of the mitigation and adaptation strategies that are being proposed involve moving trees outside of their natural range. And I just want to remind people that when you do that, some caution is always needed, because not only can that again produce situations where trees and insects and diseases come in contact for the first time, but also the actual movement itself can provide a pathway for the movement of these organisms. So in closing, it's really easy in the forest health field to sort of paint a picture of doom and gloom because, anytime you have lots of trees dying, it doesn't look good. But I'm actually an optimistic person, and I actually think that trees are amazingly resilient to all the problems that humans produce. On the other hand, I do think that that in forest health research, we actually do have a lot of really important challenges, but we have real potential for solving some of the important problems to better understand the impacts of climate change on forest insect dynamics, but also better understand the ecology of biological invasions and how they can be managed. So, Prabhi, that's my last slide, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. We have one clarification question or a pressing questions that you have. We will have a round of question and answer after the two speakers, but if there is any one pressing question, please raise your hand. It's time now. Any? Okay, so thank you so much once again, Andrew. And with this, we are going to welcome our next keynote speaker, Dr. Juliette Biao. Her title is The Role of Women in the Context of the Changing Trends for Forest Sector to Meet the Ambitions of the Future. Dr. Juliette Biao was appointed by the United Nations Secretary General as the director of United Nations Forum on Forest Secretariat, UNFSS, in 2022. She holds an MSc in Forestry Economics and a PhD in Public Policy and Administration. She has a cumulative 34 years of experience in the international development and managing complex initiatives across Africa, Latin America, and Canada, with a focus on environment, community livelihood, and gender equality. As the first female forester in West Africa, and she's first in many things, she pioneered various groundbreaking facets of natural resources. She also served as Benin's Minister of Environment and Nature Protection, as well as Acting Minister of Family and Child. Juliette is awarded Global Leadership Award. She is nominated as National Commander of Merit, and she has earned several accolades. Once again, warm welcome to Dr. Juliette Biao.
Thank you very much, Purabi. I feel really so bad after seeing the wonderful presentation by Andrew. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for you. Mine is more Mine is more about storytelling, and you know that we are good at telling story. It's really a great honor and privilege to be before you today to talk about gender perspective in forestry sector. For those who were in this room yesterday, when my sister Cecile made her presentation, you will see that she focused on women at the community level. Or when we talk about gender perspective in forestry sector, we refer to two categories of women. Women at the community levels and women professionals. So Cecile and I are complementing each other. I would emphasize women professional. And for those who don't know, Cecile and I, 24 years ago, we were among the experts who designed for the first time the training package for gender analysis in community forestry in West Africa and Cameroon, for the FAO Community Forestry Unit as part of the publication Forestry, People and Planet. So we've been in this for many years. Let me start with some really, some words of hope about gender perspective in forestry sector. I only see promising prospects for the future in terms of the evolving role of women in forestry. And it cannot be otherwise. The multiple challenges we are facing today in the forestry sector, from land degradation, deforestation, worsening fire seasons, pests and diseases, just to name but a few, offer huge opportunities for women to engage in sustainable forest management. Forest management is no longer timber-oriented, which in fact draws notions of masculinity entrenched in the need for physical force. There are some opportunities today for women to engage in. And in terms of employment, the news are also good. Indeed, out of the 33 million of employment in the forestry sector, between 2017 and 2019, 42% represent women, according to the International Labour Organization and FAO. Even at this IUFRO 24 Congress, out of the 15 speakers, 10 are women. This is to say that the future prospects are promising, but not to say that it is enough. There's still a lot to do. That said, my presentation is structured into two simple parts. The first one is really to highlight some of the challenges women are facing in the forestry sector, and also to make some suggestions about the solution. And the second part is to share my personal experience. So, with regard to the challenges, one of them is perception and stereotypes. You will agree with me that perception remains perception until you come up with evidence to really make it a reality. Unfortunately, there's no evidence, it's always about perception. One of my senior brother was even teasing me before this, I came in this room, when, what is the topic of your presentation, my sister? And I say, gender perspective, but I'm not well prepared. He said, you are not prepared? It's just about insulting men. You know it by heart. What preparation do you need? So it's about perception. The second challenge is also the lack of visibility of all efforts of women at all levels. And that leads to missing out to really take advantage of the full potential of women. The wrong practice. You know, before we recruit women, just because we want gender parity, we tend to lower standards. I find this really insulting. It means that women are not capable and we need to lower the standard for them to be recruited. I say no. this is not something to do. We better go back to the education, really, to make sure that women has equal access to education, and especially on science, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And I will share with you how I use this really to avoid to feel inferior to men. So we need really more women in those sciences, because science, technology, engineering, and mathematics has always been Achilles' heels for women. They need really, if IUFRO can do something for that, it would be good. Mentorship also is good to have women, but in no way they should be really look inferior by lowering the standard to recruit them. And even by doing so, we are also leaving out men, and that will come back to haunt us. Gender equality is about striking the right balance. And gender equality can contribute to sustainable forest management through social protection of families, national community economies, and it can also help to create a food-secure environment. Promoting equal access to education can break down the stereotypes and improve skills for greater empowerment and independence of women. From a personal perspective, I really use so many strategies to challenge men in my life since my childhood, starting from the secondary school, where I was the only girl in this school who ride the bike with men on 2 kilometers every day, 2 kilometers to go to school, 2 kilometers to come back. I did it for 2 years when I stayed in my native village. And then when I moved from them, in 1976, I entered the soccer team, the first female soccer team in my school, and I was a goalkeeper, and I won a golden award. I learned mechanic by doing. Then mechanic is something that is known to be a domain of women. You know, I was really challenging men kindly because I used to do it with great humility, and that made them really accept me. And one thing that is important is that I challenged the stereotype. I didn't want anybody to limit me. And as Eleanor Roosevelt said, and I quote, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent," and end of quote. I refuse that. So I just want to tell my junior sisters that being a woman is not a handicap. When I was Minister of Environment, I nominated and I promoted women who were capable. Those who were not were removed. Those who really deserve to be trained to really get a promotion were trained. But I will not accept any woman just because I'm a woman, I deserve a position. No, you have to work hard. You really have to work hard. And let us really strike a balance between women and men. My first job as the first female forester has introduced a major change, not only in my country, Benin, but across Africa. Until then, issues to do with forests were taboo, and forests considered sacred areas that were not to be violated by women. Additionally, I took up my position at the moment where the shift from the coercive to the participatory approach of managing forests was becoming effective, even though there were recurring conflicts between forestry department and the local community. Alongside of all this, I had to manage a predominantly male team of workers. If I tell you that it was easy, then it was a lie. But it took a great deal of humility and self-confidence to earn trust within the organizational team and with the range of stakeholders. My major responsibility included demonstrating effective leadership both at managerial and technical levels, creating a climate of mutual understanding and a bond of trust with the wide range of stakeholders, but also helping to change mentalities that denigrated women's dignity, thereby advancing their right. I want to tell my younger sisters that there is no sailing glass for women in forestry sector. What a man can do, a woman is able to do. Sustainable forest management is about skills, is about qualifications, is about competencies. And I know you can do it if you want to do it. Through this story, I believe you will find it inspiring. But at least I know I have inspired someone. Please show the picture. This is my granddaughter, only 4 years old. Last week, she told me she entered the soccer team in Montreal. I want to be like my grandma. So, like grandma, like granddaughter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliette, Biao. And with this, we open up the question and answer session. So please go ahead for a good dialogue with both Andrew and Juliette. A question from me then. What the term resilience and stress in today's world means for forest and society in the future, to both of you. What the term resilience and stress means in today's world for the future of forest and society.
Do you want to? Well, resilience and stress, I mean, it covers a lot of ground, I think. I think that the world is changing very quickly, and so with stress, it's a many-layered thing, all the way from the level of individual trees being stressed to whole ecosystems being stressed. And I think that resilience is, to me, refers to the properties of forests that can withstand these external changes. And again, it's kind of a complicated thing that, and I guess I alluded in my talk that with at least insects and diseases play a certain part of the stress that, that affects both trees and forests. And there are probably a lot of complex approaches that can be done to find solutions to those problems that range from, breeding trees that are more resistant to these problems, to silvicultural methods, to biological control. And all those, I think, in the long term, work towards making forests more resilient.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. As Andrew and I, we are complementing each other. Let Andrew talk about the resilience of forests. I will talk about the resilience of the local communities. Yeah? I think all go together. So I think when we talk about the resilience of forests, we don't really see things in a comprehensive way to include also what is needed for the resilience of the local community. And that makes us come back in the vicious cycle of poverty, land degradation, and forest degradation. I think that we still need to do a lot in terms of research to really enhance the resilience of local communities to adapt to the increase in climate change and to be able really to invest more in the protection and the regeneration of forests.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I hope now we have, yes, great, a number of them. Over there,
Hi.
on the
Hi.
left-hand side? Yeah.
Hello? I'm in the back. Hello.
Yeah,
I want to
hi.
say thank you for your talks. But I wanted to ask, because we talk a lot about equity to combat the negative trends established by a fundamentally racist society, but I've never heard anyone talk about gender equity. Only gender equality. So do you think that gender equity is not, or why do you think that gender equity is not also discussed? Because we have a fundamentally sexist society as well. Thank you.
I think maybe I missed to talk about gender equity. There's no way we should not talk about gender equity when we really want to promote more engagement of women in forestry sector, because women are really the key contributors to the conservation and the regeneration of forests. And what makes them really contributors is that they are really their specific knowledge about forests and they're dependent on forests make them this contributor. 1.6 billion people in the world depend on forests for their livelihood, and women depend more on forests. According to the 2019 report of UN Women, only 30% of women around the world are landholders, and only in 102 countries, laws and customary practices are still really restricting women from their rights. So when we talk about gender equality in this context, it's more about gender equality. So yes, gender equality is really critical. The reason why I'm saying that, when in 1990 we start promoting gender equality, the way we perceive gender equality even brought more problems to women, because we want them to do whatever men were doing without even taking into consideration the workload that they already have. So gender equality will look at what women can do to complement men, not to do exactly what men are doing per se.
Thank you. I see some more hands, yeah? Over there, yeah?
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much for the two really, really nice talks. I have one question to Andrew. So I'm here, I can get up. The other way.
Okay.
I was wondering, so you nicely explained this kind of enemy release effect. So if you have a non-native species that grows better because there are no pathogens and so on. And I was wondering, there seems to be this time delay. At some point the diseases just arrive. And what would you say, is it possible to restore that advantage by, for example, and this is a very hypothetical question, but assuming New Zealand would not plant Douglas fir for the next 50 years, would you have this benefit back, or would you say no, the beetles and the pathogens actually stay because they will search other host trees? And if you start then after 50 years of no Douglas fir, you plant Douglas fir again, would you still have the benefit or not?
So what you're suggesting, that's sort of an interesting idea. So you're saying that if there's sort of a period when there's none of the host there, that the natural...
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of an interesting idea. And of course, in agriculture, people do this type of thing to a certain extent of sort of, I can't remember what crop rotation, right? Where they plant a crop for a year and then they stop planting it for a while. But I think with trees it would be pretty difficult, right? Because, I mean, there's Douglas fir growing in people's gardens and whatnot, and that all those trees are going to make all of the herbivores and diseases persist, even if it's not being grown in plantations for a while. So I don't think that would probably be very effective, but maybe I'm missing it. Does that sort of address what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think I know it's very hypothetical, but I mean, you could cut down every Douglas fir in New Zealand, in theory. I mean, it's a non-native species anyway, so nobody would complain too much, probably. And then if you would just wait for 30 years, and I was just wondering whether this, in theory, could work, or whether you would say, no, the pathogens, once they are there, they will actually stay, they will adapt, and I don't know, so you will not be able to have this enemy release ever again.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting idea, but I don't think it would work. I mean, in fact, a really good illustration of this is actually, say, for example, again, I'm familiar with North America, with American chestnut, and the epidemic of chestnut blight went through North America between, like 1910 to 1945 or 50, and there's been almost no chestnut left after that, other than just a few very widely scattered trees. But if you plant a chestnut tree in North America, it still gets wiped out. So it's an interesting idea, but again, it's sort of analogous to intercropping in agriculture, but I don't think it would work.
Perfect, thank you.
There are a couple of more questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew and Juliette, for your nice presentations. Just a disclosure, the big brother that Juliette referred to, who humorously said gender issues about insulting men, but that's just, it's in a light mood anyway. The point being made actually is that most of the times we see gender issues discussed along the lines of competition. Women are never inferior to men, and I'm happy she emphasized that. One mistake we keep on making is that, yes, we feel women are fragile, we feel they are incapable, but that's absolutely incorrect. Women are intelligent, they are capable, and it's a great mistake to lower standards for them. When, like she said, if you lower the standard for women, it's like you're saying that they are inferior to men, and they cannot possibly be. In our own part of the world, Africa...
I would really appreciate if you can keep it precise. We have a few more questions and comments.
I'm sorry about it. Emphasis on gender inferiority is actually creating problems in Africa. Yeah, because men now feel threatened. And this has to be taken care of. Men now feel some complex, and we have to reduce the emphasis on women.
We got your point. Thank you so much. Juliette, you have any comments, or we leave it as it is?
I don't think this is a question. No. It's just a comment,
Yes.
which really align with what I said.
So we take the next one here, please.
Thank you very much, both presenters. Wonderful information. This is a question for Andrew. You showed a bit of a dire image between introduced pines and wild pines, very contrasting. I was wondering if you could maybe comment a little more on how can we use wild native species and try to make them grow as fast as introduced species? Because that is the challenge, isn't it?
You know, it's an interesting question, and I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is that, I mean, I know, for example, in New Zealand, there's quite a bit of work going on in trying to adapt native species to be used in plantation forestry to replace the reliance on non-native species. But to be honest, and I think it's a good effort to try to do that, but I think I don't think it's ever going to replace the use of non-native tree species, that just for a variety of reasons, including enemy release, those non-native tree species are probably always going to exhibit higher growth rates. To be honest, to me it's actually kind of fascinating, because I actually think, my sort of gut feeling is that there actually are probably, and I hate to give credit to our pathologist colleagues, but I sort of have a feeling that there are maybe a lot of unknown pathogens out there that actually may reduce growth rates of native species, and that we just don't even know about them. So again, I think it's really a good effort to concentrate on increasing growth rates in native species, but I suspect, at least in my lifetime, we'll never see the use of non-native trees in forestry eliminated.
Yeah, does that answer you? Perfect. Looking at the time, we can take one more question if there is any.
Yeah.
Okay, so one over there, and first you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm here in the middle. So this is thanks for both of you for great talks. So this question is to Andrew. You showed that often in time, when time flies, the pest species of the local trees also can utilize the non-native tree. But I'm more worried that then things must happen also other way around, and the non-native tree comes with a lot of companion species that are not like pests, but for example mycorrhizal fungi that are specialized to that species. So if the pests of the local trees can use the non-native tree, then most likely it will also happen so that the companion species of the non-native tree start to live with the native tree species, and then they start competing with the mycorrhizal fungi and other companion species of the local species. So, and I think there's very little research on this, and most likely when we move tree species all over the planet, we take these companion species all over the place, and they invade the local conditions, local ecosystems, and I know it has already happened, but what's your kind of note on this, and how much we should worry about this?
So what you're suggesting is things like mycorrhizal fungi being introduced along with non-native tree species.
Yeah, exactly, and then they can start using the native tree species and competing with the local communities.
Yeah, I mean, I feel something like that, it's really a fascinating idea, and I don't know much, I can't really think of many examples of that kind of thing happening, but it's certainly I can easily imagine that that's happening, and I sort of feel like there's so much, again, I think when it comes especially with a lot of these organisms like mycorrhizae and endophytes, we just don't really know that much about these organisms, and we also don't really know how they affect ecosystem processes and things like nutrient cycling. So what you're suggesting, I think, is entirely possible, but I just, and I think it would be really interesting just to know more about it, but yeah.
Thank you.
And the final question goes on this side, to the gentleman over here, on my left-hand side, please.
Excuse me, sorry, we had a question here before.
Okay. Keep it, please, short and precise.
I have a question to Andrew. We have a lot of travelers to here for this conference, while to many people from Australia, you may feel like in Sweden, we don't have really border control or biosecurity. So one argument about this is comparing to large-scale trading, travel is so insignificant. So I wonder if you have any comments about this, why we don't do biosecurity in Sweden, and do you have any message to the authorities?
So your question is, why don't you have more strict border control?
My question is, comparing, is doing border control and biosecurity to travelers worthy comparing to trading?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because you can look around the world and there's quite a bit of variation among countries in this, the strictness of their border control. So for example, New Zealand and Australia have very strict rules, Europe has much less. And I think a lot of that probably reflects the historical problems they've had with invasive species. Australia and New Zealand have had a lot of problems. Probably Europe historically hasn't. But I think as time goes on, as everyone experiences these problems, I expect that more stringent border security will be implemented in most parts of the world. It just takes, you just have to wait for more problems to express themselves.
I think there is one final question, and over here to this gentleman, please, the last final one.
There's
Oh, you are there? So that will be the last one. Thank you.
I have a very quick question, which will, address both for the gender aspect as well as from Andrew's point of view, the resilience and adaptation. I'm arguing when the climate change and resilience and adaptation is coming big way in Asia as well as Africa, how the subset of forestry, which is fodder, and then the pastoral community, what kind of strategy we have, and what is the kind of further research required for gender aspect, because millions of our people are depending on this forest for their livestock, and which is not 1 to 10, they are hundreds, and they are depending on forest. Are we thinking, because low rainfall, forest fire, and how we will cope for the resilience in our forest, which is subset of forestry, how pastoral people, a lot of indigenous community, how they are addressing this situation, particularly gender.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Should I go? Thank you very much for the question. I like to say that there is no one-all-fits solutions in terms of how to build more resilience of the communities, especially taking into account the gender aspect. It requires first the analysis of the situation, especially in the specific area of pastoralism, where I worked for 10 years. You need to know about the cultural aspect of the pastoralism before you devise a strategy for gender mainstreaming, which we don't do. You mentioned also the indigenous knowledge. How much are we taking, are we even recognizing the knowledge of the indigenous people and then taking them into account? So I think these are among the recommendations, to really know better what the situation is. Otherwise, you cannot really address it. And this one situation in India may be different from the same situation in Benin, for example. So we need first to know, to collect data. Data are lacking immensely in terms of gender perspective in many areas. Yeah.
Andrew, you have any comments?
I think that Juliette.
And then we go to the final question, but that's not the final. You can continue having a dialogue with both of them after these sessions. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Marco Aurelio from Brazil. I really appreciate your presentation. It was a great experience that you have, excellent talks. And thinking about the future, I would ask a question for you, both of you. We see a lot of young faces here at the IUFRO, and if you could send a message to all these young scientists thinking about the future, what would you say?
Go ahead.
I said it's at the beginning of my presentation, I'm really optimistic. I am optimistic, but this is not really to rest on my laurels and say that everything is perfect in terms of gender. But I think that we need first to change the perceptions, yeah, and to know that this the forest sector is offering more opportunity for engaging with both women and men. What I will say also is that, especially to IUFRO, to kind of help really further some researches. There are many issues that need to be further, require more data for us. It starts from data. That's why, you know, I really place very big importance to IUFRO Congress, because without science, there's no good policy. Every policy has to be informed by science. So that's why the young generation also, especially women, should be more interested in science subject. I'm not saying that everybody should be good at mathematics or science, but just to know that today, with the challenges, the crisis we are facing, you cannot really devise any strategy without really any knowledge about science. And when I say science, you should understand also the local knowledge that we fail also to integrate.
I think I might actually be sort of echoing some of Juliette's comments. But, I mean, one thing that I think with forestry, I mean, it's the thing, forestry, it takes a very long time between putting actions in place and then seeing the result. And I think that it's easy to look backward in time and actually see that many people who had really good intentions actually didn't completely think through what they were doing. And so my only suggestion for the future, it really is that again, is to emphasize the use of science and research as the basis for forming policies, because I mean, and I think a good example of this is with, you know, increasingly in forests. Historically, we valued forests for traditional things like fuel and timber and that sort of thing, and I think increasingly we're valuing the role of forests in mitigating climate change. But I think in implementing those policies, it's very important to think those policies through completely and to make sure that unintended consequences aren't worse than the problems that we're trying to solve.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Juliette, for a wonderful plenary session and your keynote speech that has motivated us a lot. And when I was given this plenary session, I was wondering these two contrast topics, how I'm going to conclude. And given the time, I don't have to conclude, but just to say that it's a two topic with the same, two sides of the same coin. And I suppose that's what we have to work together. And with this, now I would like to invite Eliana Pelotti, Chair of Congress Scientific Committee, and the IUFRO Honors and Awards Committee on the stage to present to you the winners of the prestigious IUFRO Scientific Achievement Award. Eliana Pelotti.
Thank you, Purabi, and thank you for a very interesting plenary session and stimulating discussion. So now we are awarding the, presenting the IUFRO Scientific Achievement Award that you may know is the most prestigious of the awards IUFRO present every 5 years at World Congresses. Yesterday, we already presented this award to 5 fellows, and today we have other 5 awardees to introduce. But first of all, please let me introduce Mr. President John Perrotta, who is actually presenting the awards. And let me thank the Honors and Awards Committee members, and in particular, Eva Schimpf for her great help in supporting and facilitating the work of the committee. So, the first awardee today is Cindy Prescott. Please come up to the stage when... Cindy is from Canada, and her research has improved our scientific understanding of the interactions between trees and the below-ground ecosystem, and the influences of forestry practices on soil organic matter and nutrient availability. It has also improved our ability to restore forests on poor or degraded soils. Cindy has contributed to scientific publishing of forest research, serving for 20 years as editor of 2 major forest science journals, the first woman in both cases. Cindy has contributed to graduate education in forest sciences through her own supervision and by overseeing the graduate program at the University of British Columbia. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, Alina. There are many people I want to acknowledge. First, my students and collaborators for their important contributions and for making science fun most of the time. My wonderful colleagues at the University of British Columbia for making me look forward to going to work every day for more than 30 years. And of course, IUFRO for providing a home for this amazing community of forest science scientists. Thank you all.
Thank you again. So the next awardee is John Sessions from the United States of America. John, are you here? Yes. Okay, please come to the stage. John Sessions' research has been dedicated to developing innovative solutions for managing forests and their resources, covering a wide range of topics, including forest economics, logging mechanics, forest biomass supply chain, and the heuristic optimization of algorithms for complex forest planning problems. With over 400 publications, his groundbreaking work has had a profound impact on the direction of forest engineering research, education, and practices worldwide. John's unwavering dedication to advancing forest operations and management practices has earned him the respect and admiration of his peers and students, making him one of the most highly regarded professors today. Congratulations.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to say how honored I am to receive this recognition by IUFRO. A person is really shaped by their experiences, and I fondly recall my first IUFRO Congress in Oslo as a student nearly 50 years ago. I have a lot to be grateful for. I thank the U.S. Forest Service and FAO for the forestry projects they let me participate on 5 continents. I thank Daniel Ludwig, who you may or may not know, who was founder of the world's largest tropical forestry plantations at the time, for allowing me to be harvesting manager. I'd like to recognize the 40 years of support that I've been given by Oregon State University, especially Rick Strawn, who provided the financial support for the Strawn Chair of Forest Operations I held for 15 years. I'd also like to recognize the more than 50 graduate students I advised, the more than 100 other collaborators whose research made me appear better than I probably am, and the 5,000 students who passed through my classes where education is a two-way street. And finally, I'd like to thank the Marcus Wallenberg Foundation for 5 great years on the prize committee reviewing the major advancements in forestry. I look forward to continuing to contribute to our profession. Thank you very much, and have a great Congress.
Thank you, John. We all had a first IUFRO World Congress. So the next awardee is Ge-san from the United States of America. Ge-san has a highly productive and impactful career in science discovery and application. He's one of the top scientists in the field of forest ecohydrology and watershed science, and has made outstanding contributions to our understanding of forest-water relations through research around the world. He co-developed a series of powerful models and tools that allow land managers to accurately quantify forest ecosystem service benefits at multiple scales and environmental settings. Ge shows enormous global leadership in graduate education, public service, and application of forest hydrological sciences to solving emerging watershed management and climate change problems.
Thank you, Helena, for the award committee. This is a huge honor and a surprise to me. I'm so honored, humbled to be among the awardees for this IUFRO. I followed IUFRO since the Salt Lake City. I went to the Brazil for that. This is like a family. I'm so honored just to be part of this. So I would just like to use this opportunity to thank so many my mentors and mentees to make this happen. We have a very active group, like the Forest Water Task Force, led by Adam Wei. I would like to thank you, all the leadership, also Dr. Rong Liu for promoting all the activities within our group of Division 8, also the Forest Water Group. So this award is not just for me, really for our forest water community to value this. Also, I'd like to thank all the colleagues back the United States, the Southern Research Station, the U.S. Forest Service for all the support to my career. So finally, I would also like to thank my family, also for their support. Actually, my son is taking pictures for me. Thank you for coming. And we do enjoy all the good weathers. And I hope next time I'll bring my daughter, my wife, also going to South Africa in 2029 to have enjoying the IUFRO. Thank you.
Thank you again. So the next awardee today is Chung Yui Chai from China, Taipei. Chung Yui Chai has established herself as a prominent scholar whose work answers fundamental questions concerning wood formation and defense in trees. Her ideas attract significant external funding, and she published in top-tier peer-reviewed journals. Chung Chui's achievements are indeed significant and are integral to our understanding of tree biology, thereby advancing forest research. Congratulations.
Thank you, Elena, and IUFRO. If I can make a change, I'm from Taiwan, but I'm right now at the University of Georgia in USA. I would like to express my gratitude to colleagues and peers who nominated and selected me for this huge honor. Very humbled by the recognition. It's a recognition for the many graduate students, postdocs, research staff, and technicians with whom I have had the pleasure to work, plus many other collaborators. Working with non-model organisms like trees, it's both challenging and also rewarding. It takes a village to tackle the great challenge, the perennial trade in the changing world, in the changing climate. I feel fortunate to be part of a growing community, especially IUFRO Division 2, to push the frontiers of forest genomics and biotechnology. So the award is a motivation for me to continue research and mentoring the next generation research scientists in this journey. Thank you very much.
And the last awardee today is Brenda Winfield from South Africa. Brenda Winfield is a world-leading scientist who has over 450 publications in the field of forest health, specifically around the speciation and evolution of fungi. Her research has been foundational in understanding the population diversity of pathogens that globally cause disease in commercial plantations or natural forests. It has contributed to developing new methods and approaches to manage or control numerous diseases and provided robust scientific data to aid efforts to reduce or prevent the spread of unwanted pathogens internationally. In addition to her research, Brenda has mentored over 100 students and collaborated with researchers across the world. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. You know, with a surname like Wingfield, you're always at the end. So the good part is I actually get to have the last word. I'm told I only have a minute, so it can't be too many words. But first of all, just a huge thank you. As colleagues have said, I'm hugely honored to being given this award. One doesn't always know who's nominated you, don't always know who's on the nomination committee. Thank you to all those people. It's absolutely amazing. But also thank you, if I can misquote, no woman is an island, and certainly in this context, this award is not just for me. This award is for all the people who've worked with me, for all the students, all the collaborators. And, you know, my biggest partner in crime, my husband, Mike Wingfield, has also had a significant part in the success. So many thanks, and I think that's been said many times by my fellow awardees. But I'm also a little bit of a minority here. I'm actually a minority in the country I come from, which you might find a bit strange, but I am. But I'm also a minority in the fact that I'm the only one here from the Southern Hemisphere. So one of my kind of messages, I guess, and this is inspired by Juliette, who gave such a wonderful presentation, is this award then should give some evidence to the fact that those of us in the Southern Hemisphere can do research excellence. This award is also evidence that research excellence can come from developing world nations. So, IUFRO, Elena, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and congratulations to all the recipients of the IUFRO Scientific Achievement Award. Let's give them a round of applause meanwhile we get it. Still, congratulations, and thank you very much for participating to these award sessions. We have now the lunch break, followed by the poster sessions.